Hey, Psych 101 students, this is Professor Rubenstein, and I'm talking to you about Unit 5. Can you believe we're almost there? We're in the second half of this Introduction to Psychology course, which is pretty great. So this is an easy unit because you only have one chapter to read, Chapter 7, and it's focused on thinking and intelligence. If you'll see here, I'm sharing my screen. This is an IQ test that was developed during World War I, so we're going to get to that in a minute. So for Unit 5, you have to take some self-tests. Make sure you do that to keep up. You have to submit, discussion post, 2 discussion posts, and this is very important, with a minimum of 250 words each. Many of you get that wrong, and I can't give you any credit for that. You can't just write 1 or 2 sentences and think you've done the work. You have to think it through and write at least 250 words, so please do that, and that's true for each post. The first one where you're commenting on the TED Talk that you have to watch, and then the second one where you're commenting on a classmate's comments. So please read the directions carefully if this is confusing to you, but it's really very simple. 2 posts, 250 words each, at least. Then you have to take the Unit 5 exam, and then you'll be done for this week's work. So you need to know about cognition and intelligence for this week. You need to know, for example, the difference between a prototype and a schema. All of these are little tips I'm giving you because it's in your Unit 5 exam, so pay attention. You need to know the difference between morphemes and phonemes. That has to do with language acquisition. You need to know about babies. When babies talk, they can speak in simple sentences, usually between the ages of 18 months and 24 months. They go through a babbling stage where blah, blah, there are no real words come out. And this babbling stage is true in every single language. So babies all over the world have a babbling stage where they're just sort of testing their mouth and making sounds that have no meaning. You need to know the mental set, what a mental set is. You need to know about confirmation bias. All of these things are in the textbook. You need to know about a bell curve, which goes like this. The most important thing for getting a bell curve or a normal curve is just to have a large sample. So, for example, the number of when students take the SATs or the ACTs, the average score comes right in the middle of that bell curve because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of students who take those tests. Jeannie, the wild child, this is a very moving example of how babies need to hear language to be able to develop language. So she was an abused child who was chained to a crib. She never heard any language. She was not allowed to speak or make any sounds vocally. And eventually she could speak, but never in full sentences. She never learned grammar. So that's an example of language acquisition. You could never do that as an experiment, but this was a rare case that scientists documented. IQ scores. IQ scores are influenced by daily stress. So if a child is abused, for example, or a child is growing up in severe poverty, there will be such a high level of stress that the child may have dampened IQ scores. It doesn't mean the child isn't smart. It means the child will not perform well on IQ tests. There is a strong genetic component to intelligence, by the way. So I want you to look at this test now that's on your screen. It's called IQ Test Go to War, Measuring Intelligence in the Army. And this is an example of how difficult it is to make a reliable and valid test that measures intelligence. This was meant to measure the intelligence of soldiers in World War I. And as you can see, it's highly linked to very specific cultural clues from that time. Most of us would not get these correct. Bull Durham, for example, number 1, I believe it was a chewing tobacco. The merino, I think it might be sheep. I'm not sure. Garnets, I think, are yellow. George 8, I have no idea. He's famous. Was he an actor, a baseball player? I have no idea. The most prominent industry of Minneapolis is maybe brewing. Could they make beer there? I don't know. 7-Up is played with. Sorry, don't know that one. Soap is made by. So you can see this was an IQ test that is totally ridiculous. And there are some modern ones that aren't quite this obvious, but that are equally unreliable and not valid to measure intelligence. So when we measure intelligence, we need tests that have been standardized. That means they've been used on thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And the key to this is, if it's a reliable measure, you will get the same score within 5 or 10 points every single time you take it. And that's how we know it's a reliable test. This is just way too dependent on culture and history. If you were an immigrant, you wouldn't answer these correctly. If you didn't speak English well, you couldn't answer these correctly. So why is beef better food than cabbage? Because it tastes better? It's a ridiculous question. So, but this is just a funny example. So I want you to keep this in mind when you're thinking about IQ tests. And finally, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Many students are diagnosed with ADHD, and often it's linked to a learning disability for around half of people with ADHD. So all of this is covered in Unit 5. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to email me. Otherwise, I will see you again at Unit 6. Bye-bye.